our special guest for today's live stream is Renee Johnston, who's coming back on the Vanguard for I think the third time now. Good friend of the show, and we're going to be talking a little bit about Joe Biden's marijuana pardons, which still have not gone into effect suspiciously enough. She's been doing some great reporting on this on Twitter and over at her Substack, which we can link to in the chat. We throw that up there because Renee wrote a great article on this very subject, and we're going to be talking about that and some recent developments. Without further ado, let's introduce to our audience and to our stream again for the third time, I believe, Renee Johnston. How you doing, Renee?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Good. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today.
Of course.
So, as Gavin mentioned, I think we're having you on today to talk about the fact that Biden made some pretty lofty promises about marijuana pardoning. Gavin and I were, hey, it's better than nothing. But what was your take on all that? You've obviously done some writing. We linked to your Substack in the chat.
Right. And so I'll just say, I'm not a journalist. I'm just nosy, right? So when the announcement was made initially, I was like, oh, all right, that's kind of cool. He's going to pardon some people. And then I started poking around. And then I found out that at max, he was pardoning 6,500 people, perhaps some more people in DC. They weren't real clear about that. And then I started looking at pardons, which are not expungements, right? Because people confuse those two things. Then I realized that there's no one in prison right now on simple marijuana charges. So we're not taking anybody out of prison. Then I realized that there's an application to get a pardon. So it's not like I'm going to pardon these people and they just get a pardon, right? They have to apply. So then I start poking around in the applications, which are absurd. Like if you just want to get a presidential pardon and you have no background reason for it, it's not something that's set out, it is a whole process that includes a whole lot of information that I don't even know if people ever fill this form out. It's so absurd. So I started thinking they're going to make people do all of this, this whole process to get this pardon that everybody's jumping up and down. And then I started really thinking about, how we got to this place where marijuana became this thing where people were literally life in prison because of marijuana. So if you start backtracking, not just to the 1994 crime bill, but before that, right, the two preceding crime bills that Biden was a part of, and you start to understand that everything kind of fed into 1994 crime bill, right? So you start with making marijuana one of those super illegal drugs that people can go to jail for. Then you start putting in mandatory minimums for people who are going to jail for drug use or drug possession. Then you start, three shots and you're out. So now if you have two things already on your record and you get caught with marijuana, now you're going to jail for life, right? For the marijuana charge. So when I started really putting all of that together, I got frustrated because I feel like this is what always happens, right? They make these announcements and people get excited and they jump up and down and, oh, he's going to do this thing and he said this thing and this thing is going to happen. And nobody really takes the time to sort of dig in and understand what it really, really means. And what this really, really meant was maybe 6,500 people, maybe a little bit more, were going to be able to fill out an application with the government to request a piece of paper that they can then have with them if at point they needed to, because you still have to tell people you have this record, right? Let's be clear. If you get a pardon, you still have to notify. If someone says, do you have this, this crime on your record, you still have to tell them you have it.
Yeah,
you just have the piece of paper.
Box.
Right. You still have to check the box, but you just have this piece of paper, this certificate that you can then present along with the thing that's with the box check to say, oh, but I got this pardon from Biden. What is that doing?
Right. That's a great point. And as you also pointed out on Twitter, you said, when I pointed out my lack of enthusiasm for the Biden marijuana pardons, people were not happy. It's been over a month and people who might have qualified for this most minimal level of relief still can't even apply. I wonder if the people who are mad are paying attention. So why do you think that is? He announces this.
I literally have no idea. It's crazy to me. I feel like if this was serious, right? If this was really something that anybody was trying to make happen so that they could provide this minimum amount of relief to people who qualified, the application would have been ready, because there's already a pardon application that exists. I mean, it's shit, like it's a lot of work, right? But it already exists. So you would think that they would already have the application ready. So what gave it away to me was he did his announcement, but I pulled up the actual like executive order that he signed. And in the executive order, what he does is he tells the Department of Justice to create a process for people to apply for the pardon. And I was like, he didn't say all that in his announcement. Like, he didn't say, we're going to put this thing in place so people can, jump through their hoops to make sure they get their piece of paper. He made it sound as if, we're going to pardon, and not for nothing. He said what he said, and what he said was true. He wrote an executive order that was going to pardon people who had been previously jailed or had a record for the, for that possession charge, right? But they didn't give any detail. So then everybody got excited, right? Oh, he's going to pardon people. And then people started assuming that just because he was going to pardon people, that means people are going to get out of jail. Well, there's zero people who were in jail for simple marijuana possession on the federal level. Zero.
That's what stood out to me so much about this is like you read it and like anybody who knows like this much. I'm not a smart guy, never went to law school, never did any of that shit. But as soon as I read this as somebody who smoked a lot of pot and been afraid of getting arrested, I was like, the feds don't come after you unless you're moving like a fucking shitload of weight. You have to be moving shit through the mail. You have to have a whole thing together. Like the federal.
Actually, you know what though? That's not true. So this is where it gets tricky, because when you qualify for this pardon, the only thing that it will pardon you for is if you have the singular record of simple marijuana possession,
which I feel like is very uncommon from the Fed.
So I mean, 6,500 people, that, it's not it's nothing in comparison to the amount of people who are on the state level, 100%. But the reason it's only 6,500 people is because if you get arrested for something else, let's say you got arrested for drunk and disorderly, and they caught you with marijuana in your pocket, right? You have both charges now. You can only have the one. So if you have the dual charge, you don't qualify for the pardon, right? So if you pled down, right, you got caught with marijuana and cocaine and you were drunk and you had the three things and you pled down, right? Then maybe you only pled down to the simple marijuana possession. So now you only have the one charge. Like there's so many pieces to it when you really think about like who qualifies for this relief. And the idea, so like there's someone sitting in federal prison when I was looking it up because he owned a dispensary in a state where marijuana is legal to sell. And he's in jail on the federal level for trafficking. But he's gonna stay there, right?
Right. Yeah, that's totally crazy. Speaking of, I just saw this breaking just a couple hours ago, so I want to get your opinion on it as well, Renee. Apparently, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and Chuy Garcia have penned a strongly worded letter asking the president to pardon all simple marijuana possession offenses, regardless of immigration status, and reopen the immigration cases of those who were deported for marijuana-related offenses. And they link down here to this letter, which looks like it has signatures from a number of Congress people. That's 8 Congress people. Yeah, I don't know if you have an opinion on this. Hopefully that's successful. I kind of doubt it's going to be, especially now that the midterms have passed. It seems like Biden kind of just similar to the student loan debt was kind of like, oh, I'm going to pretend to do something.
Right.
And then as soon as the midterms are over, just kind of, oops, I hope you didn't think I was actually serious about that. But yeah, what's your take on this?
So, I mean, I'm glad they're doing it, because one of the things that stood out to me also is the fact that it was only applicable for people who were here in the United States legally. So if you weren't a legal resident, if you didn't have your paperwork to be here and you have that charge, you can't qualify for the pardon, even if now that has gone away. And one of the things that I don't know if people understand is when part of the 1994 crime bill, and this is part of why I said what I said in my initial tweet way back when it happened, is marijuana became a reason to prevent people from coming back into the country if they had been deported, right? It also became a reason to jail people who were here illegally, so, quote unquote, illegally, if they had a simple marijuana possession. So all of those people, none of them qualify for this level of relief. So I'm glad to see that they penned this letter, but I mean, no one's getting the pardon right now anyway. Like, okay, it's great. Maybe he'll add people to the list, but I don't see it happening. There's so many continued Trump policies with regard to immigration and that no one even cares about. Like, he's going to care about this. He's not going to care about this. There's no way they're going to do anything with this. I mean, I could be wrong.
No, yeah,
I just don't see it happening.
I would tend to agree with you, considering that's been par for the course, as we just mentioned, for the entire Biden administration, right? It has been half measures and inconclusive results. Like, remember when for like 4 or 5 months, all the talk was about the Build Back Better infrastructure type of all kinds of stuff. And then we ended up getting like this paltry, like fucking 800 million, like in change infrastructure, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and then nothing else. Seems like that's par for the course. Like, what, 6,500 people can apply to, have their, simple possession, pardoned but not expunged, or, you can think for 6 weeks that you're, going to be $10,000 richer in the student debt you own, but they'll pull the rug out from under you. You know what I mean?
Right. And this is always the trick, right? Like, they make these announcements, everybody starts talking about it. The media starts, he's doing this thing, and then nothing happens, right? And then no one's paying attention to the fact that nothing happens. Every week, I tweet when I notice that there's no application ready. I've been doing it every week because I'm frustrated, right? I'm annoyed that because people were like, oh, you're being unfair. He's changed. People are allowed to think differently than they did years ago, and are you the same person that you were in 1994? And then some fools were like, she wasn't even alive in 1994, or she was like a baby in 1994. And I'm like, dude, I was a sophomore in college in 1994. Like, I was paying attention when these things were happening with the crime bill because I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, right? Like, I lived in an area that was already heavily, heavily policed, right? And was there criminal activity? Yes. But there was a reason for that criminal activity because we weren't making guns in Brooklyn. We weren't producing cocaine in Brooklyn. We weren't making, like, those things were not being created in Brooklyn, but they were there, right? So one of my big issues is, the government as a whole has created a criminal empire in Black, brown, indigenous, poor communities. And then they turned around and they punished those same communities for a situation that they created. And they've never, ever presented anything that was going to pull people out of that situation. Fixing poverty is never, ever the question. Like, how do we fix the problem, the root issue that is causing these things to be happening in this community? That's never part of the conversation. It's always, how can we jail more? How can we bring more police in? How can we police more? How can we put more people in prison? Like, how is that always the answer? So you create this whole mass situation, right? And then you turn around and you offer pardons that are going to pardon 6,500 people. And you want me to jump up and down and be excited about it? Like, no,
right.
Not doing it.
Right. And you may remember that around the same time of that announcement about the pardons, Biden also suggested or implied that cannabis would be descheduled, that it would be taken off of the Schedule 1, which would, effectively decriminalize it in the country. Right. Here's Gary Chambers back on October 6th. He's he was a Senate candidate in Louisiana, big advocate for cannabis legalization. And he was just, presenting this as if it had happened, like, this is what Biden did. He pardoned all federal simple possession charges of marijuana. He encouraged governors to do the same and instructed the attorney general to look at how we change the schedule of cannabis, basically implying that it's going to get descheduled. And of course, myself, like Gary Chambers, as an advocate for cannabis legalization and criminal justice, I'm willing to give credit if it happens, right? I think Gary Chambers was, I think he might have jumped the gun a little bit in giving that credit, but I'd be happy to come out here and say, got to give credit where it's due. This is obviously a good thing. But Biden hasn't done any of these big things
Well,
yet.
so
Literally
here's
none of
where
them.
it's tricky, right? Like, here's where he did do those things. He did pardon the charge. He did encourage the governors to do it, and he did instruct those people, but it's not going anywhere. That's where that's where the problem is, right? Like, I can stand up and make a speech and say fuck it anything. That don't mean anything's gonna happen, right? And that's the part of it where I get frustrated with the way media presents things and people with large followings present things. Like, you can say, okay, this is what he said, because it is what he said. But what is he going to do? Right? Because you don't have to deschedule marijuana to decriminalize it. They don't have to go hand in hand. It's not necessary. In the Netherlands, the way they got around the whole scheduling thing is it's just not a crime. Right? It's like they have a whole list of drugs that you can walk around with and you're not getting in any trouble. They just decriminalize it, like, period. Right? Because descheduling is an international treaty situation. Right? So the reason it's in Congress in order for it to happen is because in order to ignore an international treaty that the United States has adhered to, Congress has to put something in place to say that we're no longer going to abide by this thing. Right?
Which is crazy, because the only reason that we're in other countries are in those treaties with us is because we forced them to.
Right. Exactly. But the US, listen, I was born here, right? Like, I'm not going to pretend like there aren't some benefits to living in this country. I'm well aware that they are, but we're also full of shit, right? Like, the rules are only applicable when we want them to be applicable, right? So, one of the big things that I talk about is, like, whenever we do something wrong in the eyes of international law, and like the ICC tries to select, the international court tries to be like, yo, US, what you doing? We're just like, like, go about your business. We don't have to, like, we don't have to listen to you. We rewrite the rules in order to, allow our government, our police, our people to do whatever they want. It's the reason that technically the United States can't go overseas and torture anybody, but they can do it here. Right? They can break international law because of the way they rewrote the rules. So it happens all the time. It's not something that can't be done. But the best of all of this that people don't even talk about, there is literally a law right now in Congress sitting in Senate committees to decriminalize and deschedule. Ask me if the White House supports it.
Doesn't it have to pass? Because it passed the Senate, right? And it hasn't passed the House.
It passed the House.
Okay,
It's sitting in Senate committees right now, and it does
Yeah.
all of that. It decriminalizes. It removes it from the scheduled substances. It eliminates the criminal penalties. It does all of it, and it's going to sit in Senate committees.
So you have no optimism that we're going to see any real progress on that front in the remaining 2 years of the Biden admin?
No.
Yeah.
I have zero. And listen, I'm a pessimist. I don't trust any of these people. I mean, I'll go along, right? They said we were going to get student loan. I filled out the form because I'm not stupid, right? Like, I'm going to fill out the form.
Hedge your bet.
Right. I'm going to hedge the bet, right? If it happens, I'll take it. I'll take that $20K because I was a Pell Grant kid. So I'll take it. But I'm not expecting anything to happen. I also filled out my PSL because I work in a school. I've worked in schools for 22 years. So, maybe I'll get a little break, in another 5 years. But I literally owe $12,000 more now than I owed when I graduated from grad school.
Yeah, that's what's fucked up about all of this. And, as somebody who also has student debt, it's just like, it's fucking crazy that it was set up like this. And then they had 3 different paths where there was like supposed to be debt cancellation. There was the Pell Grant stuff. There was if you were just like a regular dumb fucker like me. And then there was if you did like public service, which is what my my significant other applied for because she works for a public radio station. And it was just like, well, probably not going to get any of that now. And it's just like, what the,
Right.
I can't say I didn't like, I wasn't skeptical of this from jump, because I remember there were a couple of people that came out and were like, hey, the way they did this was like, designed to fail. Basically, it was
Right.
designed to be open to fucking
Right.
right-wing lawsuits, which is just massively frustrating because, again, that just kind of seems to feed back into what the Democrats always do, is what you said. They want to make a speech about it and then have nothing ever happen.
Right. And it's uber frustrating. I just like, I would love for just one time when they make these major announcements that this thing is going to happen, that something actually happens, right? And it's frustrating when I pointed out, because the first thing I wrote was, it's really funny to like listen to Biden talk about marijuana like he didn't make it the thing.
Like his son hasn't been arrested for crack and yet not in jail,
Right.
even though there are
Right.
fucking
Like
plenty of people with decades.
he literally worked towards making marijuana the problem that it is. So this response wasn't even commensurate. Like it didn't even match up with the problem he created. But I agreed it's something, sure. But then the more I looked into it and the more I read, and like I said, I'm nosy. Like I was reading bills, I was reading like everything, because I wanted to be able to speak from a sense of, I did my due diligence and I did all the reading and I looked it all up and I read all the bills and shit. Like I said, I was a college student in 1994. So I remember, people were really like, oh, well, black people wanted the crime bill. And I'm like, okay, but I'm black and I didn't want it. Right? Like I sat around with a whole lot of black people who didn't want it. I know communities, and not to say that there weren't black people who supported it. Of course there were. But listen, Clyburn's black. I don't want him speaking for me either. Like there's a lot of people who, I love this saying, like all skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? Like there are a lot of people who look like me who we just simply do not have the same things in mind as far as like what's going to really do something to improve the material conditions of people. And this was just not one of those things. So when people were coming back at me and saying, oh, well, you're not being fair about the crime bill, the Republicans, the this, the that, like I tracked down the video from C-SPAN that I remembered watching with him saying, like, they're trying to give the Republicans credit. I wrote this bill. So why are you talking to me about, not blaming him from the crime bill when he's claiming credit for it? Like he claimed credit for it then.
Right. Yeah. It's so frustrating, especially because even red states like here in Missouri, we're now to the left of the Missouri voters. One of the most red states in the country are to the left of Joe Biden. Like Missouri just
Right.
legalized cannabis. This is something that's bipartisan. It's not just like a bunch of like hippie freaks out here that want it legalized. This is the modern era. Even the corporations want it legalized. You think this will be the biggest, like, and the most obvious win ever for Biden? It's popular across the board. It's the rare instance where the corporate position preferred by corporate America and big pharma and stuff actually aligns with what is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, fucking do it, dude. Like it's so obvious.
Right.
But
see, there's like a background to this, because remember when Kamala Harris was in California, she fought against people with marijuana charges being released. Right. Don't forget, the prison population is a profitable business.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. It is making a lot of people money to keep people in prison. So if you start releasing people for things like marijuana charges, you're going to lose a chunk of your prison population. You're going to lose a chunk of your people who are sitting in prison right now waiting for their trial, right? And you're going to lose a lot of people who just simply like, I'll just go along with this charge. Not necessarily like this is what I did, but I'm going to go along because if I go with the marijuana charge, I'm going to spend less time in prison than if I go through trial and I accept this other charge, right? And I get found guilty for this other thing. So there's a lot more into play. Like as far as big pharma goes, of course, like now marijuana is getting popular. People can sell it in stores. So now, of course, all the mom and pop shops and all the little places that used to be dispensed, they're all getting bought out, right? Because it's going to become a big business. But at the same time, the prison population is one of the most profitable because it's slave labor, right? You have all these companies who are producing out of prisons. Like people forget that sometimes, right? And also when you think about who goes to jail for marijuana, right? You could have, like, Zach could have the same 5 dime bags in his pocket that I could have in my pocket, right? We're both weed heads. We both just have 5 dime bags because it's Sunday. Yeah. And we ain't get through it yet, right? Zach's getting the simple possession. I'm a trafficker.
Well, either way, really appreciate the work you've been doing on this and raising awareness about this, because obviously a lot of people did come out here and just took Biden at his word and said this is dope, you know, Dank, Brandon, Rising, all that stuff, which were some kind of funny memes, admittedly. But still, you know, we should be acknowledging the reality of this and doing follow-up stories when it doesn't actually play out like it was promised, and hold him accountable and say, what the fuck, bro? Like, you promised this. We need some results here. Let's see some movement here. And if he does still decriminalize it, of course, we'll give him credit, but it looks less and less likely. I share your pessimism. Again, thank you so much for coming on. I've just linked once again to your Substack in the chat, because you do great work, not only on this issue, but other issues as well. Loved your piece about the political horseshoe theory. I forget the specific title, but you did a great job
problem with the
on
political
that one.
horseshoe. Yep.
Correct.
Thanks
so everyone
so
check that out. Yeah. Thank you so much for stopping by, Renee. We love chatting.
Thanks, fellas. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, always great chatting with you, Renee. Looking forward to the next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.